You don't have a productivity problem. You have a timing problem. You already know what it's like. You've sat at a desk at 9 a.m., coffee going cold beside you, staring at a task you've done 100 times, and felt nothing. No traction. No momentum. Just the low-grade dread of watching yourself not perform. And you've told yourself the story everyone tells in that moment. I'm lazy. I have no discipline. Other people don't struggle like this. Then 11 p.m. arrives, or maybe 2 a.m., and without trying, without a single motivational speech or productivity hack, the thinking sharpens. The ideas arrive. The work that felt impossible 6 hours ago gets done in 90 minutes, and you don't understand why. You never have. So instead of investigating it, you've learned to feel guilty about it. The world has a word for people like you. Several, actually. Lazy, undisciplined, disorganized, chronicle late, hard to manage. And you've heard these words often enough, from enough different people in enough different rooms, that some part of you has started to believe them. Not fully, but enough. Enough to keep trying to fix yourself. Enough to keep setting 6 a.m. alarms you don't use. Enough to keep apologizing for a rhythm that was never wrong, just misread. Here's what nobody told you, and what this video is going to prove. The schedule you've been fighting isn't a character flaw. It's a biological signature. And the fact that it doesn't match the schedule the world decided was correct, that's not your failure. That's a design mismatch. And design mismatches don't get solved with more willpower. But before we get there, we need to spend some time in the damage. Because it's not enough to know the reframe. You need to understand what this cost you, and why it cost you so much, before you can actually let it go. It started early, maybe elementary school, where the bell rang at 7:45 and you were already being asked to perform, to be present, alert, engaged, at an hour your brain had not yet come online. You weren't daydreaming on purpose. You weren't being difficult. You were simply running on a different clock, and nobody knew that, so everyone assumed the problem was attitude. By middle school, the pattern had calcified. You were the kid who did everything last minute, the one who turned things in late, not because you didn't tear, but because your best thinking arrived at times that didn't match the submission window. Teachers wrote notes home, parents had conversations, and somewhere in that chain of concerned adults, a label got attached. You need to work on your time management. High school gave you more control and less grace. You could stay up later. You could do the reading at midnight and actually understand it. You got your first glimpse that there might be a version of you that functioned, that worked, but only at hours that the structure around you treated as irresponsible. So you learned to hide it. You learned to reverse engineer the appearance of normalcy. You did the work at 1 a.m. and talked about it at 8 a.m. like you'd done it the night before, like everyone else. Then came jobs. And jobs don't care about your rhythm. Jobs have start times. Jobs have morning stand-ups. Jobs have managers who track arrival and equate early presence with commitment. And you sat in those open-plan offices, fluorescent lit, noise-saturated, scheduled to within an inch of their lives, and you ran the math. If I could just be normal, if I could just get up when I'm supposed to, if I could just be like the person next to me who seems completely fine with all of this. Here is the internal monologue you ran. Every morning you didn't perform. Every meeting where your brain was still buffering while everyone around you seemed fully loaded. You heard this. Why is this so hard for me? Other people manage. What does it say about me that I can't do a basic thing like show up ready? I'm wasting time. I'm behind. I'll never catch up. I should be better than this by now. And when you tried to fix it, when you downloaded the apps, bought the planners, set the alarms, hired the accountability partners, it worked for a week, maybe two. Then the old rhythm reasserted itself, and you felt worse than before. Not because you failed at the task, because you failed at the fix. And failing at the fix meant the problem was deeper than strategy. It meant the problem was deeper than strategy. It meant the problem was you. So you tried suppression. You forced yourself into the mold. Early to bed, whether you were tired or not. Morning routines you hated. Caffeine in quantities that should be regulated. Cold showers, because someone on the internet said discomfort is discipline. And you produced. You did. But you produced at a fraction of what you were capable of. You ran slow. You made more errors. You forgot things. You felt like you were operating in second gear while everyone else had access to fifth. Not because you lacked the engine, because you were running it at the wrong RPM, for the wrong road at the wrong hour. Here is the real question this forces you to sit with. Not am I normal? You've already made peace with not being normal. The real question is sharper than that. Am I paying a permanent tax for being built differently? Is the only option to keep grinding against my own biology for the rest of my working life? Or is there something here I've been fundamentally misunderstanding? That question deserves a real answer, not reassurance. An answer. Point 1, dismantle the label. Let's start with the word itself. Lazy. Say it slowly. Think about what it actually means, not what it's come to mean culturally, but what it describes. It means unwilling to exert effort. It means choosing inaction when action is possible. It means a preference for ease over output, comfort over contribution. That is what lazy is. You stay up until 3 a.m. finishing projects with complete absorption. You enter states of concentration so deep that you lose track of time entirely. You produce work, sometimes extraordinary work, at specific hours with a consistency that suggests not randomness, but pattern. The issue is never the effort. The issue is always the timing. Lazy people avoid work. You don't avoid work. You avoid performing work at hours when your neurological system is not prepared to execute it. Those are not the same thing. One is a character deficit. The other is a biological reality operating outside your conscious control. You've been accepting a diagnosis that doesn't match your symptoms, and every time you accepted it, you delayed the actual investigation by another year. Lazy is the wrong word. The right word is misaligned, and misalignment doesn't require punishment. It requires adjustment. Point 2. The real psychological origin, chronobiology, the scientific study of biological time, has known for decades that human beings do not share a single internal clock. Your circadian rhythm, the roughly 24-hour cycle that governs your sleep, your alertness, your hormonal fluctuations, your core body temperature, your cognitive peak, this rhythm is genetically encoded. It is set before you are born. It shifts across your lifespan, reaching its latest point in adolescence and slowly pulling earlier as you age. But the fundamental pattern, whether you are a morning type, an evening type, or somewhere in the middle, is not a lifestyle choice. It is a trait as heritable as your height. Researchers call this trait chronotype. And the evening chronotype, the biological signature that makes you most alert, most creative, most cognitively capable in the later hours, is not a flaw in the system. It's a documented variant. Approximately 25 to 30% of the population carries it. In evolutionary terms, it served a function. While the early risers slept, the late types stayed alert. Groups with range in their chronotype distribution were groups that were never entirely unguarded. Your rhythm wasn't a mistake in the genetic code. It was a feature. What is a feature in 10,000 BC becomes a liability in a 9 to 5 economy. That economy was not designed around human biological diversity. It was designed around industrial efficiency, around factory schedules, train timetables, the logic of visible labor in a single shared shift. The standard workday is not a biological prescription. It's a historical accident, and you've been treating an historical accident like a moral law. Your chronotype didn't emerge from poor choices. It was there before you made any choices at all, which means it cannot be fixed by making better ones. Point 3. What the judgment reveals about the judges. Now let's talk about the people who called you lazy, the managers who noted your late arrivals, the parents who lectured you about responsibility, the partners who framed your nighttime productivity as avoidance. What did their judgment actually reveal about them? It revealed that they operated in a world where their chronotype was the default setting, where the schedule that suited them happened to match the schedule the institutions around them required. They didn't earn that alignment. They inherited it. Their early morning alertness wasn't a virtue they developed through discipline. It was a biological lottery they won before they were old enough to understand what they'd won. When someone has never experienced misalignment between their internal rhythm and the external schedule, they read the absence of that misalignment as evidence of character. They are not being malicious most of the time. They genuinely cannot feel the friction you feel because they've never felt it. Their ease looks like effort to you. Your friction looks like failure to them. Neither observation is accurate. Both are the product of two people operating from different biological baselines, each assuming their baseline is universal. The confident delivery of the judgment, the certainty with which someone told you that you needed to sort yourself out, was not evidence that they were right. It was evidence that they had never been required to question the one advantage they never noticed they had. Point 4. The specific advantage of your chronotype. Evening chronotypes don't just peak later. They peak differently. The research on this is worth knowing precisely because it isn't just about when you feel alert. It's about the specific cognitive modes that emerge during your peak window. Studies consistently show that evening types score higher on measures of creative thinking, cognitive flexibility, and divergent problem solving than morning types. The hypothesis is that the later peak window, which often coincides with reduced external stimulation, creates conditions more favorable to the kind of loosely associative, boundary-crossing thinking that underlies creative and complex cognitive work. The quiet of 11 p.m. is not just a preference. It is a cognitive environment. Evening types also tend to show higher tolerance for cognitive complexity, a greater willingness to hold multiple competing ideas in working memory simultaneously before resolving them. This is not useful for simple, repetitive tasks. It is extraordinarily useful for the kind of work that requires sustained engagement with ambiguous problems. And ambiguous problems are increasingly the only kind that can't be automated. The window in which you think best is also the window in which you think best is also the window in which you think most distinctively. That is not a consolation prize. That is an asset, one you've been burying under shame and exhaustion from fighting a schedule that was designed for someone else. Point 5. Misuse versus use. The critical distinction. Your chronotype, suppressed and misdirected, produces the symptoms everyone has been labeling. Chronic lateness, difficulty initiating in the morning, inconsistent output, the appearance of disorganization. These aren't the trait. These are the trait under pressure, the trait being forced through channels it wasn't designed to move through. Your chronotype, acknowledged in street Berkshire around, produces something entirely different. Work that gets done with unusual depth. Concentration windows that last hours without erosion. A quality of output that people who've seen it, on the rare occasions when you've been allowed to actually function, have noticed. Not because you're exceptional in some romantic sense, because you're running in the gear you were built to run in, rather than the one the schedule assigned you. The difference between the two is not motivation. It is not discipline. It is not character. It is alignment between when your biology delivers capability and when you ask it to perform. The misuse is the forced morning. The use is the structured evening. The trait itself is neutral. What you do with the structural knowledge of it, that is where the decision actually lives. The first change is in what you say to yourself when the mismatch surfaces, because you've been using language that pathologizes a trait, and language shapes the conclusions you draw from experience. Stop using lazy, unmotivated, can't get started, behind, struggling. These words locate the problem inside your character. They imply that the solution requires you to become different, to override who you are through sheer effort of will. Start using off-cycle pre-peak, not in window misscheduled. These words locate the problem in the interaction between your biology and the structure, not in the biology itself. They are accurate, and accuracy matters, because when you misdiagnose the problem, every solution you try is aimed at the wrong target. When you wake up at 7 a.m. and can't engage, you are not lazy. You are pre-peak. Your cognitive resources haven't loaded yet. This is true regardless of how much sleep you got, how good your intentions are, or how important the work is. The brain doesn't care about importance. It cares about timing. When you're alert at midnight and the work flows, you are not avoiding life. You are in window. This is when your system delivers. The appropriate response to this information is not guilt. It is planning. Use it. Language change is not cosmetic. It redirects your internal problem solving from how do I fix myself to how do I align my environment with my reality. That is a fundamentally different question, and it produces fundamentally different answers. Not every environment can be restructured, but more of them can than you currently believe, because most of the rigidity in your schedule isn't structural, it's assumed. You've been accepting constraints you've never actually tested. Start by separating your non-negotiable time anchors, the commitments that genuinely cannot move, from the ones you've been treating as fixed simply because they've always been scheduled that way. School pickup cannot move. Types. A client call with someone in a different time zone might not be able to move, but the report that's due by end of day. The deep work block your manager's scheduled at 9 a.m. because that's when they're sharpest. Those are assumptions, and assumptions can be renegotiated. Map your week against your actual peak window. Where is there genuine structural flexibility you haven't claimed? Where have you been performing cognitive work during your trough hours, your biological low point, when you could have scheduled administrative tasks, meetings, emails, or routine work instead? The goal is not to eliminate all morning commitments. The goal is to stop scheduling your hardest cognitive work in the hours when your system is least equipped to do it. Environments that suppress your chronotype share common features. Mandatory early starts with no flexibility, continuous availability expectations, open plan physical spaces that eliminate quiet, and cultures that equate visibility with productivity. If you are in an environment with all four of these features, you are not underperforming because of a character flaw. You are underperforming because you are working in the environmental equivalent of trying to run with weights on. Environments that allow your chronotype to function share different features. Output-focused evaluation rather than hours-focused evaluation. Asynchronous communication norms. Control over your own schedule within broad parameters. And tolerance for non-standard working patterns. These environments exist. They are not rare. They may require you to look for them or make the case for them, but they are not hypothetical. The next time someone comments on your schedule, your late arrival, your preference for evening work, your apparent slowness in the morning, you need a response that is neither defensive nor apologetic, because both defensiveness and apology accept the premise that you are doing something wrong. Here is the two-sentence internal protocol. The thing you say to yourself before you say anything out loud. My chronotype is a documented biological trait, not a choice. I am not required to explain my biology to someone who has never had to explain theirs. What you say externally can be calibrated to the context, but what you say internally can be calibrated to the context. A statement of fact, because it is a fact. And when you approach the external conversation from that internal position, not from defensiveness, not from shame, but from accurate information about yourself, the conversation changes. You stop trying to justify. You start describing. Description is a fundamentally more stable position than justification. This last shift is the most important and the most easily misread, so be precise about what it is. Ownership is not pride. Pride is about status, about being better than. Ownership is about accuracy, about knowing what you are working with and making intelligent decisions from that knowledge. A surgeon who owns their skill doesn't feel proud every time they perform. They simply know what they can do, account for it in how they take on work, and perform accordingly. That is the posture, the mental posture of someone who has stopped treating their chronotype as a liability. Looks like this. They stop apologizing for not being available at hours when they don't function. They stop scheduling their most important work in time slots that will guarantee mediocre output. They stop using productivity systems designed for morning types and expecting different results. They build their structure around their actual peak window, not the peak window they were told they should have. And when someone pushes back on that structure, when someone implies that their schedule is evidence of laziness or lack of commitment, they do not argue. They produce. They let the output speak to the question that the judgment was really asking. Ownership is not a declaration. It is a set of decisions made consistently over time, in alignment with accurate information about how you actually work. Here is the larger pattern. Your entire relationship with your own productivity has been organized around a standard that was not derived from biology or psychology or any serious study of human performance. It was derived from the industrial economy's need for synchronized labor, from the historical accident of the standard workday, from the cultural mythology that equated early rising with virtue, a mythology that predates any scientific understanding of chronotypes by centuries. You have been measuring yourself against a standard that was never designed for the way your mind works, and you have been losing the comparison and concluding that the failure was yours. The failure was not your standard was wrong, not wrong in a way that lets you off the hook for every unmet deadline or missed obligation. Those are real, and they belong to you, but wrong in the sense that it was never an accurate measurement of your capability. It was a measurement of your compatibility with a single, arbitrary schedule. And compatibility with an arbitrary schedule tells you almost nothing about the quality of what you produce when you operate outside its constraints. Here is what is actually true about you right now. You are a person whose cognitive peak arrives later than the world has decided is convenient. You have spent years, possibly decades, producing work at a fraction of your actual capacity because you were producing it at the wrong time. You have internalized a verdict about your character based on evidence that was never actually about your character. And despite all of that, despite the mislabeling, the suppression, the exhaustion of running against your own biology year after year, you kept showing up. You kept trying. Not because you were disciplined in the conventional sense, because you cared. And caring is not a symptom of laziness, regardless of when it shows up or how it looks from the outside. The final reframe is this. This is not about your productivity. It never was. Productivity is a variable. Day goes up, and it goes down, depending on conditions that are largely structural. What this is actually about is your identity, specifically the version of your identity you've been carrying that was built around a lie. The lie that your rhythm is a character flaw. The lie that the mismatch between your biology and the schedule is your fault to fix. The lie that functioning differently is the same as functioning worse. You are not a broken version of the morning person the culture asked you to be. You are a complete version of something the schedule never accounted for. The clock was never set for you. That was always the problem.